we do need to move fast, but I think the quality of our service comes always first. So if I need to move slower, I'm going to tell now guys that move slower. And that was a lesson actually. We always get pushed, as entrepreneurs go faster, faster, and faster, but you can also fail by going fast.
Hello and welcome to the Reflective Impact Entrepreneurs, the show that explores stories of founders who listen, experiment, and reflect as they build ventures that do good and do well. I'm Umi, and in each episode, we meet some of those founders. And today I'm joined by Matias from Cosysense. For listeners who may not know you yet, please introduce yourself and share what's the one thing you're trying to change in the world and why do we need Cosysense?
My name is Matias Acosta. I'm the CEO of Cosysense. To introduce myself, I'm an engineer by training who did after a PhD in science, who after decided to work at the UN and then realized that I had an entrepreneurial side and I wanted more action or let's say more hands-on work. What we are trying to change in the world as a company, or better, what we are already changing in the world as a company is we are making buildings understand and adapt to the people inside them. The reason for that, it's a problem that everyone knows about it and nobody knows the consequences. You go to an office, a restaurant, or a hotel, you complain because it was too cold or too hot, nothing changed after. And that problem happens because buildings run on rules set very long time ago, even before you were there, maybe even the building was different. And that's costing over 30 billion pounds a year and more than 8 million tons of CO2. Totally avoidable CO2 that is being just literally wasted today. So effectively, this type of businesses, commercial buildings that I just said, today are paying because buildings don't understand and adapt to the people inside them. And that's exactly our purpose as a company, to change that. Almost like make buildings living entities that understand the humans inside so they can really work for them and also work for the grid and for the planet.
Wow, that's amazing. So not only are businesses losing money, but they're also adding to the climate crisis as well. What a great mission you're on. Matias, can you paint a picture for the listeners of what was happening in your life, community, or industry that made this problem impossible for you to ignore? And what did it teach you about the people that you now support?
Yeah. Look, it's a leap problem, actually. I'll try to make a very long story short. And the story is the following. During the pandemic, when COVID started, there were travel restrictions imposed by countries. I'm originally from Argentina. My partner at the time, she's Hungarian. So we were restricted to meet each other because we were in two different countries when it just hit. It was March 15th. So we decided to become digital nomads to be together. And we were going to countries where we could be together. There were not many in the world. What happened was we were working from as many co-working spaces, restaurants, and other kind of commercial shared spaces that you may imagine. And I was always too cold or too hot. And as an engineer, started making some numbers. I realized the problem that I just shared about, and it kind of made no sense. And I exactly remember it was a building in Singapore that we were there because my, at the time, partner, as I was saying, Sophie, she had to be there. And it was freaking cold and I couldn't work anymore. And that was when like, I'm just building something to stop this. It doesn't make sense that they are paying to make my life impossible. And that's really how it started. The first kind of idea, it really started taking off, I would say, when I went back to Cambridge, I had to give a talk. And then I was staying at a friend's house who basically can hack anything in the world and can build any hardware you may imagine in like no time. So I told him, hey, can we just build some sort of prototype of something, maybe a sensor, maybe something else, I don't know, but can we build something to see whether people would react to actually sharing how they feel? And do you think maybe after can we actually adapt buildings for those feelings? And that's kind of was the very first starting point. That was around August 22. And to give you a little bit of a timeline, in case that's relevant for questions after, August 22 was the first idea. February 24 was the first time when I moved full time into the company. My co-founder, Sebastian, came a few months later. And June 25 was when we started getting our first recurrent revenue and things starting going better and better and better with some exponential growth.
Absolutely. I remember that time when you were in the cohort and you came in with that prototype, the rating on how you feel and the way you were talking about it then and where you've got to now. Just really want to kind of like dig into that today. I mean, you've come so far and you're doing such great work. So you've shared with us the moment it became impossible for you to ignore. I'd love to explore how you started to tune in. You said that it was a lived experience first, but then who else's kind of needs, pains, desires did you tune into after that? Was it like customers or was it a colleague, community? And just tell me a little bit more also about like how you went about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, I actually follow a cooking recipe, if you want, where I need to start understanding stakeholders. So what I did was I first created a survey, and that survey was about I asked people that frequently go to co-working spaces, to restaurants, whether they typically feel this pain of like I'm too cold or too hot. It was a overwhelming majority. It was like 60 to 80% of the people that responded. It was like 50 to 100 people said like, yeah, this is a pain. And then I thought like, okay, that's great because I'm not alone. But obviously, I wouldn't pay to a co-working space not to feel too cold or hot, right? So I need to understand who pays for it and whether it's a pain for them. And then I had some calls with managers of offices and hotels mostly. And then I realized that many people didn't quite make the connection of the fact that everyone knew that they received complaints all the time, but they were not making the connection that that's costing them money necessarily. But electricity costs were a pain. And they were telling me that. And typically now I know much more about it, but it's really kind of the number one controllable cost. The reason is typically for a restaurant, for example, you have staff and food that will be literally much higher probably than electricity. But as soon as you reduce those, you reduce the quality of your service. And electricity is not like that. Like the same applies for an office, effectively from different matters. But so that's when I thought, okay, this is interesting. And then we built this prototype that I told you with my friend, and the one that you probably saw at the time when I was very early stage. And literally every time I was going somewhere, I had in my backpack that prototype. I to the point I recently talked with someone from Cambridge Enterprise, and then she told me, I remember in the annual gathering, like everyone dressed with gala suits, it was like very formal and everything. And you were also well dressed, but you had like this weird sensor with you and you were asking people to press it.
Yeah, I remember that as well.
So, so I was always doing that around like every single person just to understand it was like, an icebreaker. But actually, I was even traveling with it and I was putting it into cafes. Sometimes cafes or offices I had to ask because it's a small space. But I actually even put it sometimes in airports, randomly in the middle of the airport, just to see whether people would stop and actually press it. And it was happening. And that's when, again, I started realizing, okay, this may have some momentum and people get it. They get it with one sentence. You don't need to like, spend a lot of time. And I think that is important. And the other thing that I now realize that is important that I didn't know at the time is that by understanding the different stakeholders involved in the problem, I was uniquely aligning interests. And let me tell you why I say this now, because it's very important for a complex environment such as buildings. In buildings, you have occupants, you have the operator of the building. It may or not be the manager of the branch, but you have the operator of the building. You then have a manager of a branch. You then may have even a landlord. Each of them, they have different interests, incentives, KPIs, even, right? And it often happens with a lot of solutions in the industry that they capture one of them and it actually may create a negative impact or a negative implication towards the other. And that's exactly what our solution is not doing. Our solution is uniquely aligning interests because if I have as a occupant or a customer, let's say, of an office or a restaurant have a better time, I probably spend longer time and spend more money, right? Then the manager likes that. That's obvious. The operator may or not like that. What the operator may want is I don't complain, I don't bother, because the operator might be running around fixing things, like things breaking buildings. They are very complicated. So what the operator wants is like not to be bothered, effectively. And then the landlord have a contract whereby they get paid depending on how profitable the business is. So if the manager is doing better, then the landlord is doing better. So that's kind of like, like a way of incentivizing or aligning the interests of people. And I think that's an important aspect of our solution that only after I recognize, not at the beginning.
Thank you for explaining that system within the building, the actors who are in the system in the building. Do you still have those conversations with those actors in that system? And if so, like how frequently you do that? Do you speak to more than others now? Tell me a little bit what that looks like.
Yeah, when you start learning more about the problem, you always start realizing there's much more complexity. At the beginning, you are always a little bit of I would say, an ignorant in a good sense. Like sometimes I think to keep going your aspirations, you need to ignore some of the complexities. I think that's an important aspect of being an entrepreneur at the beginning. Um, Now I know there's many more stakeholders and actors. I mean, there's big facility managers, small ones. There's contractors. There's HVAC service providers, after sales providers, um, installers, electricians. There's so many stakeholders involved in the ecosystem, consultancy firms, efficiency firms, etc. So yeah, and we keep on thinking and we keep on talking. In fact, lately for the past few weeks, because we are getting some awards and some recognitions by rather important industry stakeholders, we have been invited, and I have been giving talks to some of those very specialized, and I would even claim sometimes much more knowledgeable people than me in the industry. They really know what the industry is about, 30 years of experience. But then we are just coming with a different approach, a different idea. And I think we are kind of getting ourselves a seat on that table, a seat that probably didn't exist before.
Yeah, that's great to hear, right? And that's the effort and the time, and you even immersing yourself in that space. And with these conversations and receiving feedback and learning through that and evolving as a business and evolving as a founder, what's the most uncomfortable feedback you've received from these people that you've been speaking to? And how did you respond to it?
It's a great question. I'll tell you one long ago. It was not from a client. It was in a competition that we got into the finals, and then you were getting like a very detailed mentoring. The person, very important person in the industry, engineer, originally from the US. Uh, he was literally telling like, this is, pardon for the word, but like he was literally saying it like, this is bullshit. It's not going to work. It's never going to work. I don't even know why you are wasting your time. And you know what my problem was with it, and why we kind of almost make the company culture? It's like, I don't mind if you tell me you don't believe on something we are doing. Or you can even tell me something is wrong. I do things wrong. I'm a human. Okay. Everyone is a human. We always commit errors. But you can tell me that. And you can tell me the underlying reason of a problem. You don't even need to give me a solution. But give me the underlying reason. Because if I get the underlying reason, and I prefer actually direct feedback, then I can go back and work out something, work a solution. At the end of the day, that's my job, right?
Mm.
Getting them to understand problems and finding the solutions. That's like the whole entrepreneur career. But if you tell me your idea or whatever you're doing is bullshit and that's it, it's like, how am I supposed to do something with that? And that was a little bit hurtful, particularly at the time, because again, you are also an early entrepreneur. And look, you always hear a million rejections a day and nobody believes you. And that's fine. But again, if you give me an underlying reason, I can work with that. And without it, I can't. Now that's a long time ago. In today, what happens? It's more about like distrust of something new, I would say. or distrust maybe that we are replacing people. I don't think that's the case. And let me tell you a little bit the typical things we get. First one, uh, we're going to make buildings non-compliant to standards. Uh, in reality, so far, almost all the buildings we see, they deviate from standards. The reason is like, if people have a remote control, they just put whatever temperature they want. And in theory, the government set parameters so that you're not supposed to go below 21, neither like above 27, for example. I'm not saying these are correct numbers, but there's no actually impediment for a person to actually go beyond regulations. Whereas the first thing we do is we actually take the regulations into account. So we set concrete guardrails or boundaries for our AI to act. So in fact, for the first time, the building cannot be non-compliant. It is always compliant. The only thing we do is we actually, or our autonomous control does, is actually call it play, which is automating within the limits. The second one, where it's like you are going to break the warranty of the air conditioners, and we use actually controllers that are either the original official manufacturer controller, or like there's a few approved controllers that we can use as well. We are not building the whole hardware by scratch ourselves. So again, they are kind of tiers, I would say, of something that obviously removes control of a person. And that maybe here might come, I think, from, well, maybe lack of knowledge, lack of testing, like seeing how it works. But it may also potentially come from the lack of, are we going to replace people? And in our case, yes, we do have an autopilot function. The building will run by itself entirely, but the results have to be analyzed by someone. The oversight of our autopilot is always done by someone. And the only difference is that someone today is working 17 hours trying to cope with a million problems that is impossible to cope with. And we are removing probably 7 hours of those problems. So, hey, instead of 17, you're going to be working a more normal 10 hours a day because you don't need to bother about people complaining to you or changing the full set points. And that saves a lot of money as well, which is a great coincidence. And mostly actually at the end of the day, the two things that our clients care about is like margin recovery, and that's what we're doing, and customer satisfaction, and again, that's what we're doing, and both things are quantified. So in reality, I think we're just augmenting the operator. We don't see ourselves right now replacing at all an operator. That's not the role of our tool.
Yeah, I think it's really great how you've taken that feedback and you've actually just baked it into the way that your organization works. I just want to go back to that scenario, which was the person that's working like 17 hours a day or whatnot, and to 10, with your solution. So if I'd spent a day with that person, like before Cosysense, what would have their world looked like, and where would have I seen the most friction and frustration?
That's a great question. Look, it it does depend a little bit on the size of the building, how it will happen. But let's say for middle-sized commercial buildings, you will have an operator that is overseeing probably 30 to 50 buildings geographically distributed. For a very large building, you will have one person that oversees that single building, right? Because obviously it's much complex. In either case, so far from all the conversations we have had and the time I spend with them, uh, typically they are just getting emergency phone calls like all the time that something broke and somebody else who is supposed to probably be capable of repair that immediately cannot repair it. And then acting probably as a negotiator with different contractors and trying to solve things, uh, always kind of instead of proactively, reactively. That's kind of like the typical person uh, day, I think, with very early starts and potentially phone calls in the middle of the night that imagine concrete example. I was talking with a hotel facility manager at had dinner a few weeks ago, and they were telling me, yeah, like the main elevator of like a 300 rooms building just broke, and it's like imagine like you're the whole guest cannot go to the rooms. They need to like climb stairs, 10 floors, and you are on vacation in London for 10 days. Can you imagine the the outcome that that has in terms of your TripAdvisor's reviews or things like this? Like people pissed off. The problem is some of the devices that these people oversee, again, elevators, air conditioners, server rooms, different type of aspects of a building that are entirely invisible to us occupants when we go somewhere. And those are critical elements. The whole building operates because it has those critical elements working, and they break like everything.
Mm.
So when that happens, then they need to be running around, etc. So now put that what I just told you, and meanwhile, while you're trying to fix those problems, you're getting every half an hour an email or a phone call saying like, "Can you change by 1 degree the temperature?" Like I complaining, and someone else doing the same, and they and something because you don't answer, then they go and start knocking your door. My feeling of how these people operate is they're often turning off fires. Imagine, right, that situation, critical. And meanwhile, someone is really grabbing them and saying, like, can you do this? Can you do that? Like, imagine if our firemen were to be working like this. They're trying to literally turn off the fire, and I'm pushing them from behind saying, like, can you serve me a coffee? This is how buildings operate today, from my perspective, at least the ones, let's say, that we are observing. Not all of them, definitely not all of them. There's very amazing ones as well. But the industry standard, I think, is still far from being proactively solving problems, and is still far from being able to monitor and stop that. And at the same time, how do you cope with the fact that you cannot do that? You try to keep your building operations constant. And when you do that, you are wasting a tremendous amount of energy. And that's kind of where we can be. We can save you that energy, which is money, emissions, comfort. We don't bother that person anymore. We can also proactively start evaluating what breaks before it breaks so that we can support that person further. So again, that's why it's the augmentation. It's not really the replacement, because that person will continue turning off fires. Like it's impossible not to happen, at least not in today's world.
Yeah, I love the way that you frame that and what your product does. It kind of it's like an additional assistant to the building manager who's got to do their job. And you're right, they've got like bigger tasks to complete. And if you're constantly on a hot day just being nagged by these small little tasks, how are you going to sort the bigger things out?
And two little things about that. Those little things, the problem is they add every 15 minutes, and then it ends up being a gigantic thing at the end of the day. And that gigantic thing is the bill, the electricity bill,
Of
and the
course.
emissions. Just to give you context, 1 degree you change in a set point of an air conditioner can imply between 3 and 15% energy change, for the good or for the bad. So again, tiny adjustments, big results at the end of the month. But the other interesting thing now, I am getting in that hot day that you just mentioned, I get typically now 10, 20 WhatsApps from some people that know me and say like, how I wish that Cosysense was here. It's freaking cold and it's 35 degrees outside, or the other way around. Like it's very cold outside, and I don't know if I should be wearing a swimming suit in my office because I can just withstand it. So these things happen so often and cost so much money and emissions, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah, exactly. I want to go back a few steps in our conversation and your satisfaction board that you're carrying around with you, right? Your, if you like, your first small test, right? I'd love you to take the listeners through like this first small test you ran. And it might be that, it might be something else to just kind of get an idea of whether Cozy Sense had legs. You know, what was that moment where you were like, you know what? Yeah, this is, we're onto something. Can you take me through that first kind of test?
I'll tell you the first one that failed and the second one that worked,
All right, let's do that.
and you can see which one which one people want to remember. Um, I was still, when we were kind of in the very early prototype stage, I was still not full time. Uh, I was um, I was still traveling to be together with Sophie, my partner. Um, because the pandemic was still happening and the travel restrictions were still there. But I had already prototypes, so I was backpacking effectively, if you want to call it, or nomading with a backpack with some sensors. And then I was going to Barcelona, and then I remember like, yeah, look, it, it's a place that definitely air conditioning matters a lot because it gets rather cold in winter and super hot and humid in summer. So we did a try, and I sent 50 cold messages in LinkedIn, and we closed 3 deals. So we knew basically therefore there was some traction because I knew no one, and there was some interest. So, and then we installed, believe me, we spent a lot of effort installing the very best thing we could install. The thing is, the technology was not yet ready, so it really didn't work. We couldn't change very well the air conditioners, and our best idea at the time was trying to put robotic fingers on top of buttons. So the robotic fingers were going to be pressing the buttons, and then we will be changing the temperature for the people. The robotic finger was just pressing to the side of the button or pressing a wrong button because it moved. So it just didn't work. But it was the first moment like we validate, okay, this is now getting more serious because like from just a few cold messages, we are getting some prospective clients. And then, because anyway, it was an overlay, there was no real bad consequence for anyone. Eventually, I will reach out again to those early supporters and tell them, look, now we are ready to actually expand. But I learned a lot of lessons from that. So we spent quite a bit of time refining and thinking the technology and trying to be a little bit more conservative, really. We do need to move fast, but I think the quality of our service comes always first. So if I need to move slower, I'm going to tell now clients that I move slower. And that was a lesson actually from that. Uh, we always get pushed, as entrepreneurs go faster, faster, and faster, but you can also fail by going too fast. So there's always, at the end of the day in life, there's always, a kind of balance like hopefully you should find. That balance for an entrepreneur is probably 10 times faster than for a corporate, for an NGO, but there's still a balance. You can still mess things up if you go way too fast now. And then the second one, though, was like we spend R&D time, we spend more time. We were then, at least I was full time, not yet my co-founder, but like we were capable of developing more the technology and understand better those challenges. And then in a period of 6 months, we saved 34% of energy. We quantifiably increased comfort, and we had peaks on shoulder month of 82% of savings. That was a very kind of legacy building at the time, uh, manually controlled, etc. Right now, not every building will save such an amount of energy. But literally, that first more serious prototype with more serious technology was the point where we said, like, okay, this is getting somewhere. And actually, that convinced some of the investors that they came on board. And that's basically the very first real case study that we have with real technology that was getting real results that allow us to start, let's say, a slow rolling up, understanding all the processes of installation. And from that moment, we did that a few times. Now we literally quantified over 143 things that need to happen before we install. And we have now a new product, internal product, that makes a lot of those steps fully autonomous. And that's why we're very close to be capable of just installing across several countries at the same time. But again, it has been a kind of learning path with basically it's not a straight line.
Thank you for taking me through those, both like absolutely great examples that gave you a signal either way, right? And both, if you reflect back on them, they're both positive as well. At the moment, it might not felt like that, but as you kind of move past that moment, you're like, oh, actually, we now know what not to do, or this didn't work, and now we can have a look at another way to tackle that. What was the last test you ran?
The last test we ran, the thing is, we kind of always run tests. That's a true answer. Like every now and then we just come out with some idea or concept and run a test. Um, we have been running a test on a client side because we believe we found a manufacturing error on the actual air conditioner and potentially the design of the building. And that test implied putting actually logic software on the edge, on inside kind of one of their buildings equipment, to understand every single change that happens in that machine, whether that change is human made or AI made, to discover how heat exchange influences the indoor conditions of one room, and whether there's a problem with the logic of the air conditioner. So that's kind of a very, very scientific, let's say, test. Um, we very recently have been running another test. I tell you, we are literally about to run. In fact, we just came up with a prototype. It's in some offices or restaurants, they have kind of what it's called a fire up process. That's kind of the ramp up period whereby, before the restaurant, for example, opens, they need to start turning on different machines. Some machines take a lot of time, to reach, for example, I don't know, an oven takes time to heat, like that from your home. Well, the same is for a restaurant, right? Now, imagine you are turning your oven at 5 in the morning because you open your restaurant at 8 in the morning, or you turn on your oven at 6 in the morning because you open at 8 in the morning. Now, there's 1 hour difference. That 1 hour difference will cost money. If you have a lot of restaurants, that can become a lot of money. To give you a perspective, one of the clients we're talking about, we believe there is an optimization opportunity of around 2 hours of the fire up process that could result in a 1.6 million pounds savings on a portfolio basis, on an annual basis. And that's 1,400 tons of CO2 that we could be saving as well. So huge, just 2 hours changing a process. Now, the problem is like, it might be possible to do it fully autonomous with our systems or not. It will depend on some of those machines, right? So the prototype of the experiment that we are planning to run very soon with this client is actually influencing behavior, or trying to change the behavior of people in the building by having live signs that basically indicate whether the fire up process is happening as it's supposed to happen or not. So we kind of put like a direct live message that changes. Could be done with the display, etc. But like to see whether that first influences behavior, and what is beyond projections, what is the actual, let's say, cost and CO2 reduction.
So you're constantly listening, testing, learning. I love the fact that the service that you've created forces you to work in the real messy world as well. It's not just digital, right? You've got to take into account like the physical world, people, infrastructure, things you can't change. It's no small challenge, right, at all. And I love the way that you kind of navigate through that gracefully. So experimenting isn't just about moving things forwards. It's also knowing when to pause or let something go. Was there a time you chose to hold back and you're glad you did?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It happens all the time. I think that the first point, and when it often happens to us, is when we realize, like, is that experiment, should we do it, going to have an outcome that has value for the client, and therefore would the client pay for it? Because at the end of the day, I think what you need to define with those experiments is an advancement of the company. And if we are an impact venture, impact matters, the venture part matters. So we need to make money. So experimenting for the sake of experimenting is fantastic. But if you are an academic, basically, right, and you have some hypothesis, but that's a different career path. It's equally great, by the way, but it's a different career path. So I think that matters a lot for us. So defining very well whether we will have some concrete outcome and value for the client, and then thinking as well. Okay, imagine now you do an experiment, you learn something, and you actually implement and change something with the outcome. Because also, if you're not going to move forward the outcome, why in the first place are you doing the experiment, right? So it should be, again, changing something. And that's something, again, it could be value for the client or it could be value internal for the company. But at the end of the day, it has to have concrete value and change something. And just maybe the last point to say about this is I think experimentation matters a lot, but the rate of experimentation ideally should be changing over time because ideally you are getting into a more kind of, let's call it perfect solution will never happen. But if you are learning, it means you are getting to something better, which means like you shouldn't be necessarily experimenting all the time, or at least not with the speed that you used to have, and that's maturing. I think as a company, right? Now, external circumstances may change, and then you may need to pivot and then start all over again. That's fine. It's the life of an entrepreneur. But I think kind of like understanding that evolution well, it's important for the experimenting side of things.
Absolutely. And do you have an example that you're comfortable with sharing
Uh,
around something that you were going to do and then you were like, actually, you know what? Let's not do this.
Look, I would say with some, I mean, without going into the technical details, but like we have made decisions or with not testing, for example, certain sensors or certain controllers because they wouldn't, again, the outcome should they work was like, but wait, we have this other one and it's not really going to add value other than yet one other integration. And we already have hundreds of integrations, for example. So um, also some time ago already as a company, we decided we're not experimenting anymore with hardware. We'll become more hardware agnostic and stop building hardware ourselves. So that was, let's say, a big one. Like say,
Mm.
like, okay, we stop experimenting. Like, bear in mind when we started, I was soldering electrical equipment, right? Um, so, so it was really kind of a big evolution, I think, since then.
How do you, as a founder, build reflection into your day to day or your week to week, month to month?
Yeah. Look, that's a great question. And probably for me, it's kind of almost exactly the opposite that I have always heard with other founders or C-level people. I always heard people, I'm very stressed, so I meditate half an hour, and that's how I get my mind clean, etc. I'm exactly the opposite. I need to be running, or I need to be actually, I don't know why, uh, on a plane, on a bus, uh, kind of those are my moments. And to be fair, there's also two more moments. One is when I'm falling asleep. Unfortunately, I cannot control it, and a lot of thinking comes typically, some of which I note down, and it just extends a little bit my let's say going to sleep period time, but that's fine, I guess. And we do have a little bit of a I'm not sure if I will call it entirely a team reflection, but let's call it a little bit more of a weekly relaxed time on Fridays, whereby every Friday we eat together. One of our peers cooks in the office. We have now in our office a slow cooker, and we cook and we speak kind of more freely together. And now we are adding actually to that Friday a half an hour discussion on reflection at the end of the day. That's really a reflection on best practices of some of the AI tools we are using because like, it's all new for everyone at the end of the day. Some of the things we're using are very much frontier. So
Mm.
I would say as a team, those two are things that we do.
No, that's great. I love that. And I love the kind of communal cooking. It's, does that feed into the way that you lead?
Uh, it's a good question. Maybe thinking about experiments and the way I lead, yeah, I do believe kind of my role as CEO, it's the same as what I'm doing with clients. It's aligning incentives and keeping people happy at the end of the day, comfortable with what they're doing and able to express if they are not comfortable as well. Um, and I think creating that atmosphere where people can thrive, because at the end of the day, I think probably that's my job. Um, one part of the job is like literally, for example, looking for funds so that people have their salaries at the end of the day because it's part of them being comfortable, right?
Mm.
But other parts are more like, if you want, mundane, like, I don't know, people have their own cars and can buy whatever coffee they like in the office. Like, I don't control it, it's fine. You know, look, it's very entrepreneurial. If we're 100 people, maybe we need some more rules. But right now, let's say, I think there's much more peer trust because we're like a tiny family at the end of the day. Um, and to give you an experiment, a live experience, which probably represents a little bit this kind of leadership style. Um, when we were still three people and things started to accelerate, um, we actually went for a whole week and lived together. My co-founder, our first employee, in a single tiny apartment, whereby we knew we could access their air conditioners and everything. So we actually installed the whole system and lived together for a week, the three of us. So we were kind of experimenting and feeling our own solution and our own problems as a team, kind of all together, and understanding, okay, what can we do better in the future, stuff like that, right? So again, trying to collectively understand things and then moving forward. I think that can be the summary of all the things that I just told about.
Love it, love it. I love the fact that the three of you got together and went to a place, not only tested your product, but you're kind of testing your relationships as well. See if that
Absolutely.
kind of holds up. It's great. Um, what's the bravest decision you've made after starting Cozy Sense, and what did you learn from it?
I think probably uh, I'll tell you two. The first one, and by far the hardest decision I ever made with regards to the company, was when I was quitting my previous job and going full time. That moment was like literally jumping, uh, like jumping from a cliff really to the vacuum and not knowing what was going to happen. And that was very scary. And particularly was very scary in my case because still the company didn't have money, and I have limited savings, and I could see how my savings were going down every single month. And that was probably a very big thing for me at the time because I knew like if I'm not making this happen, that's it. I need to go back and look for a job. And that's very, very hard to do because it's like it's a hard failure, right? And little failures you can overcome them, but a hard failure and saying like, okay, I didn't achieve this, I will need to move on with my life entirely. I think that's hard. And it's also fearful, I think, that moment because unfortunately our educational systems don't prepare us for that kind of uncertainty. I would say something culturally, every country is different, but one thing that I appreciate actually from a few months I spent in the US, is I do think somehow in their culture, they have that in there. They have a lot of things that, by the way, go kind of against us. Who am I? I'm a minimalist person. Efficiency is all kind of like what we do, right? So the US is not. But I really appreciate the fact that they support you and allow you to dare to dream. And I think that's very important for an entrepreneur as well. And then I wanted to tell you a second one. We rejected what a lot of companies would consider almost like a tier one global accelerator. The reason for that was the conditions we thought were not really appropriate for us at the time. And then after that came another investor, and we also had to reject them. Again, the conditions for us were not necessarily appropriate, at least for what we considered. And those two rejections were very hard because it's not that we had a lot of money in the bank account at the time, uh, to the point that after we had like a rather short runaway before we closed the round. So it was extremely hard. But now, um, looking it backwards, with the we say in Spanish we say with the newspaper of the Monday to this. The basically it was a great decision. The reason why it was a great decision, and let me give you a tip for any entrepreneur that might be seeing this. And I got this from a, no, I wouldn't say a mentor, but someone that knows a lot about entrepreneurship, and we had some long discussions a few times. Valuation is considerably less relevant than one may imagine at the beginning. If you get 1, 2, 3, 5 million as a first valuation, it's fine. It's not going to change the course, I think, of your company, provided it's not extremely high or extremely low. What it matters much more than that is two things. First, that you find the right investor and that is aligned with, again, your incentives, whatever those incentives might be. Could be more impact, could be much more hyperscaling. Up to you. It could be both. Uh, and the second one, and this is very, very important, and almost going into legal terms, it has to be ordinary. Those shares that those investors get at the beginning have to be ordinary, because if not, you are shooting your feet for all your subsequent rounds. And you are shooting your feet also even to your future employees and to yourself. So more than negotiating the valuation, um, consider always, are you aligned with that investor? Is that the right investor? Talk with other startups that got invested by them. And second, this aspect, they have to be ordinary, and keep that as much as you can, because then you are rowing on on the same kind of boat, let's say, and you are rowing towards the same direction, which is extremely important. They will suffer if you do a down round. If you have someone non-ordinary, they don't suffer, and that's a problem.
Hmm. That's very wise words. Thank you for sharing that. Uh, You've talked about the lessons and changes along the way and how those turn up in your day to day and your kind of values and your purpose. I want to just take those reflections and see how they translate into the differences your venture is making in people's lives right now. Can you share with our listeners one story of someone, or it might be a group of people as well, whose life has been changed by Cosysense and what changed for them?
Look, I thinking about this, I could share definitely some client stories, but I'll keep it more internal because I think it's a little bit more. Uh, it's it's a more interesting story, I think. We every semester we typically take between 1 and 3 students as interns. The reason for that is like, whenever we can, really, we think that's a great opportunity for the students to learn a few months, like get some professional experience. Maybe we get to know future talent. It's kind of a potential win-win scenario, really. Um, and then we got an interesting case last semester. One of the students um, got actually scammed by someone impersonating me. Now, this person got an email, someone saying it was me. This person is remarkable. He's, in fact, eh, becoming an employee in our company, advancing a lot of fronts in the company. Now, what happened was, got scam was a few £100, and it was entirely at our system. So it was not a cyber attack to the company. It was really a personal scam that, unfortunately, a young person with a good soul got into. Then we talked with my co-founder. I said, look, at the end of the day, if he would not have done this internship in our company, he would not have been scammed. That's it. So we decided to tell the person, look, we'll just reimburse you. Okay. And we just reimburse him. Now, what the person shared only recently is that he was struggling economically because he was paying some study debt, and he was almost going bankrupt because of those few £100. Because again, he's not from the UK, it's from a different background, etc. And he didn't want to share that. And he was actually, without us knowing, he was doing some extra hours elsewhere just to try to cover his debt. So he was very, very grateful, because it was a whole mess for his personal life that we were not aware of. And that was the time when actually he decided after, okay, I'm going to quit everything else and I'm going to start with Cosysense, because I think the values of these people, in this case, it was my co-founder and my staff, are aligned to what I feel it's right.
I love that. I love that, and I love the humanness that the way that you describe this, and it's it's beautiful. I don't even need to go any further than that. It's just lovely what you the approach. Every solution creates a ripple effect. Have there been any unintended consequences, good or bad, that have taught you something important about how people live with your service?
There is one, for example, very concrete, very technical, but one of the challenges that we had, and we know now some ways of overcoming that, but it's like imagine a space is comfortable, people are comfortable, it's all fine, but then someone who just comes perhaps is uncomfortable, right? Perfect comfort is impossible. Um, and then that person decides to open the window. The air conditioner is running. Now we cannot put sensors in all the windows in the world. Uh, it's just economically unsustainable. Um, so if we don't have a correction in the software for that, the building may start consuming more energy, and we cannot recognize that, or initially we couldn't. So, for example, that's a very concrete, exactly opposite scenario of what our solution should be doing, because effectively that person is disrupting potentially comfort for others, but at the same time, our solution to keep the comfort might start increasing the energy consumption. So that's a very, very concrete example that we know how to overcome by now. But again, at the beginning we didn't. And then, for example, one thing as well that we have now approaches to solve, but at the beginning was an unintended consequence that creates potential problems for the future is like, one of the unique aspects, as I was saying, is buildings can understand people with our solution. And we don't know who is who. We don't retain any personal data at all, never, ever. But we have a kind of average comfort for each space that changes based on human feedback. And that human feedback comes from QR codes, buttons. It can come from different interfaces, really. The point is like you can complain to our system, and that makes the system better continuously. Now, maybe you enter into a cafe, you don't see our, let's say, comfort feedback mechanism, and you feel it's not comfortable, which is a perfect fair situation and happens. And then you go and complain to the operator of the building. And then the operator can do probably two things. One is go to the QR code or button and press a complaint, or it can override our system because, as I was saying, it's always a human under control. When that operator overrides our system, unfortunately, the system didn't learn. So that problem in reality, that discomfort of that person is not learned. It's not a learned scenario. It's a wasted, unfortunately, learning scenario. And that again probably creates an unnecessary change in the energy consumption and probably on the wrong way as well. So why is an unintended consequence? Because the initial comfort is not perfect, and a change of the state driven by the operator did not produce any learning, and it most likely created an energy negative consequence. Now, in reality, if we were not there in that building, the exact same thing would have happened. So it's not really an unintended consequence of our solution per se, but it's a scenario that we should solve as a company. And now what we have an internal metric that every time there's a human overrule our AI, we get an alarm, immediate alarm, and we as a company investigate everything that has been happening in their life, out of weather, in the weather, amount of people, who was the operator who override it, etc. We try to come up with a plan of why that happened and how we can improve it, and then we implement a solution. So every time someone now overrides our system, we feel a tiny fail. And that tiny fail allow us to make the solution better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love it. You're learning, but your system's learning. And and I love the way that you framed that the override is your mechanism for change or improvement as well. It kind of triggers that feedback loop, triggers that let's think about a new solution or how we might fix that. And I love the way that you've baked that into your organization. I also wanted to maybe we go a little bit technical here, but you've used a recognized industry standard to understand whether your service is delivering the impact you intended. Could you share with our listeners what that framework is and what leading indicators you track to help you understand whether you're on the right path?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it matters a lot, right? Because not only it's about our impact, our financial, if you want, outcomes are tied to the energy savings as well, because we are an impact venture. So it really matters that first, internally, we believe in savings we're generating. Second, our clients believe it as well. It's actually, the name is complicated. It's called the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol. It's an international protocol, as the name says, and it's for energy efficiency companies. Really, it's kind of a global standard accepted for quantifying energy efficiency gains at the end of the day. And then it has different options within that protocol. One could be an option for a whole building. One could be an option for device, each device or electrical equipment independently. So it's option. Typically, we follow option B or C, really, depending on the type of client and what makes most sense, really, from the data they have or from the data we contribute towards. But then, once you have that done, the thing is what you need to understand, for example, for air conditioners, but other machines as well, is there are parameters that are modifying the performance of a device, and one cannot control completely weather. External weather is one of the largest influencers of the energy consumption of air conditioners. Concrete example, we went through a heat wave here in London a couple of weeks ago, 35 degrees measured in some places in the city. We saw across client sites, their air conditioner consumption went over 200% more in terms of how much they were consuming because of that heat wave. So just to give you an idea, it really matters a lot. Every degree matters, right? So then we follow another kind of guideline, which is from ASHRAE, which is also an international organization originally from the US, related with building performance as well, monitoring and optimization. Guideline 14 is called, so that basically we have a quality control on when the protocol pass certain thresholds that indicate that a baseline that we create, it's accurate enough. And why the baseline matters? This is very important because the baseline defines what is your initial state. And then once we activate our system, we do an intervention, perturbation, if you want, of the previously existing system. The difference between the original system, meaning the baseline, and the intervening system, meaning after Cosysense, that's actually that difference is the energy efficiency that is gained. And by knowing how, let's say, how cheap or expensive the electricity is at a certain point in time, we can know how much money those savings imply. And also by knowing how dirty or clean the electricity at a certain point in time is with grid intensity factors, then we can understand the CO2 equivalent reduction that was avoided from the energy savings, right? Now, any energy efficiency company in the world can probably give you those numbers. They typically are not as rigorous as we are. We're all PhDs, so we like to be rigorous and we like numbers, and that's why we follow those international protocols and standards. But that means we need to wait before we can intervene in a building because we need to create that baseline and meet those quality controls. But at the end of the day, one very particular aspect of our company, there's no other company in the world that has this. We have also a human index, a comfort index. And that allows us to understand whether the intervention has a positive or a negative outcome with regards to guest experience at the end of the day, in a hotel, in a restaurant, office. And our goal as a company is improving both. So improving all the metrics associated with energy savings, that is money, carbon, at the end of the day, and at the same time getting better the human side of things. And the equation for us, and this is sometimes hard for clients to understanding because it's a multi-objective optimization that we have to do, is that margins are recovered because we actually increase the satisfaction. So it's not at the expense of people, because it often happens the other way around. Like effectively 35-degree outside, you turn off all the air conditioners, uh, you will save energy, a lot of energy. But people will be suffering. In fact, they can't be probably in the building, right? So that's why it's a multi-objective optimization. You need to meet different criteria at the same time. It's not linear.
Yeah, I love it. I love the way that you blend the quant data you get with the qual from the humans. And I've always been fond of the phrase that like data gives you the what, but humans give you the why. And it's a really nice blend of the way that you kind of explained how you measure these indicators and your impact. I want to move on to scale now. So, Matthias, as the business grows, how do you make sure your impact grows with it and stays true to your purpose?
That's a great question. I think at the end of the day, that comes down to finding the right business model, monetization. Because as a startup, at the end of the day, you are like a plane that needs fuel. That fuel comes initially from investors. And then the more you monetize or generate revenue, then basically you keep on refueling your plane. At any point, if you run out of fuel, you crash. Okay. So uh, if, and it almost goes back to the aligning incentives, right, with your customers and the different stakeholders. If you basically, your revenue model is entirely tied to your impact, I don't think there's a reason to believe that your impact is not going to grow because you are fueling it. Now, there could be unintended consequences. Okay, I'm not saying that's a different story. You should investigate that. But at least, what is your primary impact? If it's 100% aligned with your monetization model, which is your business model, then effectively, I don't see a reason why these two should deviate. And to be fair, you are very much aligned with your VC investor as well, because you are growing your financial metrics at the same time. If you have an impact investor, your impact metrics, right? So I think that's the key. The key is like it has to be 100% aligned, both the business model and the impact outcome.
Absolutely. And we can see the way that you've told us and taken us through the Cosysense story that your impact is baked in to your business model. So as
Yeah,
people want more Cosysense, the impact comes with it, sort of thing.
yeah.
Um,
Let me tell you the effect that we have, just to make that very, very, very clear and how it's ingrained. Uh, the reason why we have the business model aligned with our outcomes. The outcomes are energy savings, again, monetary savings and CO2 savings, plus the comfort, is because we charge typically, we provide an end-to-end service whereby the installation, the hardware, and the maintenance, it's on us. And what we charge is a subscription, could be monthly, could be annually, but with a simple warranty. And the warranty is like, we will save you more money, and therefore we're saving CO2 and energy, than what you pay us. So the return on investment for the client is really day one. From the moment they install, like they will be saving more money than the money they're paying.
yeah. So what's the biggest barrier between where you are now and the next level of impact to reach more people?
Entirely execution. That's what keeps me awake today. Um, how can we basically deal with some of the exports, imports, hardware installation at scale, everything while keeping the excellence in quality control and deployment that we have been doing and delivering a great service to the clients, right? Like,
Mm,
and that's effectively the challenge, the challenges we're having today. And how can we bring those processes in a way such that they become very predictable? We have metrics that allow us to learn and effectively bring times down, because we have potential clients that are already clients or coming as clients or in negotiations, that if we want to take their buildings, we need to be installing 10 buildings a day. Believe me, that's extremely challenging.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look outside, I mean, there's a lot of buildings in the world, and all of them are running inefficiently. So not all of them, but a lot of them are running inefficiently.
Yeah.
So that's the big challenge. And this is not, unfortunately, it's not just a piece of software. You need hardware because buildings are not connected to the internet often, or they are not connected to different cloud services or things that might be required in order to generate those savings. Uh, and even so, there's a lot of retrofit solutions out there that are magnificent. And in that case, you don't need like a whole change in the building. In our case, the beauty is you don't need to change or stop your operations really.
Um, is there a system rule or policy change that would 10x your impact and reduce the size of, say, the emissions problem more than any feature you could release that would not only help you, but everyone else in the ecosystem?
Look, that's a great question. I'm not a policymaker. When I was working before at the UN, I was dealing with some policy and policy making. Um, I would be scared of talking without actually experimenting or understanding unintended consequences of whatever I could say. But realistically speaking, things like, for example, subsidizing fossil fuels, it's something that makes no sense probably, or that could contribute to considerably shifting away some gas-related technologies that probably shouldn't be there anymore in buildings, but because it's subsidized, they're remaining there. But again, that has a lot of unintended consequences. So I'm just speaking without knowing the full truth here. But there are aspects related with net zero regulation of buildings that could have a substantial impact as well, like literally tightening and make, for example, if you say tomorrow, let's ask every building to change their air conditioner systems with, they can be a maximum of 5 year old, right? Now,
Mm.
unintended consequences of that are tremendous and probably catastrophic. Simple reasons. There's a lot of carbon in the infrastructure of buildings. So if you tear apart half of a building to put a new heat pump, you might be actually creating more negative impact than actually you may have thought.
Okay, so now let's go into the lightning round. Matthias, what permission slip do you give yourself or your team?
Permission slipped. Well, we typically actually have our Fridays lunch. We often go for drinks actually with the team every few weeks. Go for runs sometimes together as well. So kind of like little things, I would say, to keep the team going, having good relations. I think those are kind of permissions we give to ourselves.
Whose voice are you most afraid of losing as you grow?
The voice of fairness.
The last thing you changed your mind about?
We thought we were not going to be hiring someone, and we now decide together with my co-founder after a long discussion, we are going to give a personal opportunity.
The most recent thing you learned about your customers?
The customer had a great idea on how we could reduce some of our capital expenditure by leveraging one part of their infrastructure. And I think it's a great idea.
As you grow, what's one thing you'll never compromise on?
Quality of service.
The moment that made you stop and think, this is why we do it.
Every single time there's a heat wave or a cold wave, then I get WhatsApp messages of someone saying like, I wish Cosysense was here.
When you think of scale, do you picture growing bigger or making the problem smaller?
Actually, the problem becomes smaller, but it can never be zero if we grow. The simple reason why the problem can never be zero is because buildings are complex systems and you optimize them, but there's always problems. So we grow and we reduce or minimize the problem is simultaneous. We can never go to zero.
If you could whisper something to your earlier self just before you started Cosysense, what would you say?
Think a little bit more and engage a little bit more with people and see what is out there before you start building.
Thank you, Matias, for sharing your story so far. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. Before we wrap, where can people find out more about Cosysense or connect with you?
Absolutely. Connecting with me is simple. Matias Acosta in LinkedIn. That's by far the best way. And checking more about Cosysense, it's also very simple. Checking our website probably is the best way. And that's cosysense.space.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening and leave a quick 5-star rating or short review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps more people discover these stories from the reflective impact entrepreneurs who are building ventures that do good and do well.